We present a short story called Changed, written by Andrew Dresner, all rights reserved. Narrated by using the voice AOD in Google Gemini 2.5 Pro Preview. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, events, and incidents are the products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. Please don't continue listening if you're triggered by situations centered around drug use, mild adult content, and some violence. Sex change, but it's not what you think. One day, I was kicking ass as an analyst, now just trying to find a way out of this. It's been a few months and still no progress. Was I always this way? And what I believe to be my past life, a delusion? The question plagues me every waking hour. I would never have gone for a woman who I now look like. Not fat, but slightly overweight, smallish chest, I guess not shapely in the right places, at least from my former taste. Straight black hair cut short, and the need for glasses. The only thing that grounds me is that I do remember my former life in detail. I've been able to compare memories with the real world and found they do match. Unfortunately, I quickly received a crash course in the inner workings of menstruation. As a man, I dismissed it, while with a girlfriend, I'd become frustrated in dealing with what I thought was bullshit. No sex, mood swings, and they'd call it weird names, each had something different. Writing the cotton pony, the monthly visitor, and many others. My first-hand experience included cramps, aches, and a mess. At first, I didn't know what was happening. While searching the web, thankfully, I found a lot of people who have no problem sharing. After some digging around a drawer in my room, I was able to find some supplies. I didn't find a diary of the one's body I took over. I relied on contextual clues, detailed schedules, and a pile of letters I found. She was not dim-witted or anything, but unremarkable in almost every way. An underachiever moving through life without any ambition. I felt I was in two places at once. Some moments felt like I was still Kent and others Nina. I quickly learned that I now lived in a small room located next to the janitor station in the basement. A key card in a front pocket with the room number written on it. Thankfully, Nina kept a detailed schedule, and I also knew where to go and when. I remember getting to the janitor's storeroom and quickly stripping off my dress. The stale smell of sweat wafted off me, and my hair moved unnaturally. The strands seemed to be glued together by the lack of washing. I had to shower right away, maybe thinking it'd help wake me up from the screwed-up dream and I'd be myself again. In a fleeting, momentary fit of sexual tension, I began to rub my hands over my body and quickly pulled them away. Adjacent to the bedroom, a single toilet and a stall shower. It was located in a corner of a janitor's storeroom. I saw scattered around a few buckets, mops, and a shelf with cleaning supplies. I peered into the stall and didn't see soap or shampoo. I grabbed some random jar and headed into the shower. The curtain's original color was obscured by a growth of black mold. I didn't remember what happened to my clothes. I then noticed they were in a pile next to one of the rolling yellow buckets. The black dress with the pink and white floral print sat on the dull linoleum floor. Goosebumps covered me as I waited for the water to heat up. I entered the shower and tried to lather up with the contents from the jar. It was thick and didn't seem to dissolve in the water. It had a strong smell of ammonia which stung my eyes as I tried to rub it on my skin. After what felt like hours, I turned off the water, only to realize that I didn't account for a towel. I found a roll of paper and tried my best to dry off. This effort added red blotches to my alabaster skin. I avoided looking down in a strange feeling of embarrassment. How intrusive it was to be looking at myself. The same feeling I had when I moved my hands over my arms and chest. I noticed that I had a substantial amount of hair on my legs and under both arms. That type of grooming would have to wait. Not feeling confident I could tackle that, or should due to Nina's personal preferences, and also didn't see a shaver around. I grabbed the dress and undergarments from the floor and shuffled back to the room with the bed. Luckily, no one saw me, not sure how I would have reacted. fully naked, clutching a wad of dirty clothes. A solitary nightstand stood next to the bed, and a closet near the door. I searched for something to put on, but found more outdated and dirty clothes. I briefly fiddled with a bra and finally had on a shirt and sweatpants. I grabbed the pile of files, a clipboard off the nightstand, and glanced at a clock that was beneath everything I'd just cleared. It was 3 a.m., and I couldn't hear anything other than my shallow breathing. Thankfully, I didn't need to work until the following day. I fell onto the bed, and a musty odor floated up as I closed my eyes. I jolted awake and thought it was just a dream. I then looked around the room and to myself to find it wasn't, and my heart racing. I pulled at the drawer in the nightstand and it fell to the floor. The contents were still sitting in it: a flip phone, wallet, some keys, and a checkbook. Nina had been working at the hotel for around 7 years, I estimated, after counting a stack of pay stubs. Her weekly pay was a mere fraction of what I earned as Kent, almost equaling a typical bar tab when out with a group of friends or clients. She had briefly amassed some small savings and was almost finished paying her college loan, a diploma for an associate's degree from a college typically used as a stepping stone. Some letters were from her father, but no sign of a mother. The job was simple: coordinating with all of the departments to manage the various events held at the hotel. What would take Nina a whole day to arrange took me only a few hours. This gave me time to think, improve my wardrobe, and organize. A new curtain was on a shelf just a few feet away from the shower, actually a box of 50. Next to it, boxes of tiny shampoo bottles and bar soaps. I was thankful now for being able to clean myself properly. I also made use of a clothes washer and dryer. Not sure why she lived the way she did. Had she given up? The never-ending days of doing the same tasks over and over again, watching countless weddings and family parties, never invited to the ball? Didn't see any indication of it until I discovered an email address. The credentials, scrawled on a sheet torn from a notepad, jammed in the corner of the side table drawer. Nina had written messages to her dad a few years ago, but they abruptly stopped. I later learned that he had dementia and died in hospice. A bus ticket and the cost of the funeral almost completely wiped out her savings. Her checkbook confirmed this and the last few entries. After a visit to the front office, I found the hotel provided an allowance for clothes that old Nina never took advantage of. I carefully picked out some new items and made use of the lost and found for anything else I needed. Me, as Kent, would have never done any of this. Me, as Nina, now had so much time to think. With such a shortage of old Nina information, my mind was flooded with old Kent. How was she, or he, able to keep up with my old life? She definitely didn't have, among other things, the right personality. In feeding my compulsion, I took a trip home, or at least my former one. A quick ride by train and I was in Hoboken. I visited my former gym to test out a theory. My locker combination in the men's locker room worked. My personal trainer still worked there, and the position of each workout machine perfectly etched in memory. As the old me, I remember watching women as I worked out, trying as much as possible to show off. During the train ride back to New York, I felt confused. Was I vindicated, or did I feel more depressed? Then my thoughts brought me to Kent's sister. She was the one I missed the most. We were tight until this happened. I wanted to figure out a way to meet her where it would seem natural. Claire had recently become an ER doc after countless years, and was also about to get married. I got back to my room and pulled out an old laptop I took from Lost and Found. I was careful to connect to public Wi-Fi only. I logged into Kent's email address, as if I had done it 1,000 times. Didn't stay in long for fear of detection. A few emails from friends, some from Claire, and a ton of junk. I didn't dare to log into social media or any other websites. I found out he fouled a big deal I'd been working on. Why hadn't he come back? Or at least contacted me? I guess if I was in his position, I'd rather live in my old apartment and have access to money. I saw a few emails he sent to his parents. They'd commented on his odd behavior. Not sure why he never thought to change my password. That was the first thing I did once I found old Nina's email account. I settled into a routine and began to work out in the gym during off hours. My body slowly changed. I became more shapely and my clothes began to fit better. As an added bonus, I was given a raise out of the blue. I didn't question it. I was still under the impression that I'd have a chance to return to my previous body and back to my former life. I began to imagine this was a test, challenge, or some sort of repentance. It came in waves. Sometimes things would be okay. Other times I'd be totally lost, feeling trapped, and I'd weep. Not something I'd ever done as Kent. Great sobs as I clutched my pillow as darkness surrounded me. A few times I'd become impulsive, pull out the laptop, log into Kent's email, quickly log off, and continue to cry. On one of my days off, I took a trip to a nearby library. I needed a break from the internet, which proved useless. I'd type into a search engine what I thought happened to me and only found references to movies and books. A librarian pointed me to the religious section. When I was a kid, we'd go to church every Sunday until college. As Kent, I found little time for religion as the years passed. Now I was frantically looking for a reason why this happened and how to reverse it. One of the books contains stories about souls who've been reincarnated, some remembering their former lives. Nothing about rituals that can switch people, and I returned the pile of books. I dragged myself back to the hotel, into the little hole I called home, and I tried not to cry again. I pulled open the laptop, and after sifting through all of the sites I'd found previously, I came across a psychological study, but it turned out to be partners using virtual reality to simulate switching bodies. It was an interesting read about how the participants felt, but didn't answer any questions. They began to feel protective of the body they perceived as their own. A side effect of this new identity had been unanticipated relief. I no longer had to exhibit macho behavior, never realizing how much effort went into maintaining it. Other emotions surfaced, and I had trouble with many of them. I found it hard to read people compared to before. As Kent, I either understood them or possibly just didn't care. Not only do I now miss things, I feel left out of conversations if more than one person is talking. One of the biggest mysteries has to do with how Nina ended up living in the hotel basement. Would have thought she'd have an apartment, at least share one with a few others, or perhaps a partner. That brought me to my next question. What was Nina's preference? After a talk with a fellow coworker, it was confirmed. She was heterosexual. Nina had been set up with a guy the coworker knew. He was critical, rude, and got away from Nina as fast as he could. Not sure how she took it. Memories are vague. I can zero in on some emotions, but not able to pinpoint when or what. So often, I wish I knew more. It's as if I've been reborn and got lost trying to find my way. A break in my case came about when I met up with someone at the hotel who worked in the laundry room. A woman called Paula asked me if I was still living in my car. I questioned her as to how she knew that. She said one of the bellmen saw me one morning getting out of it. He noticed it hadn't been moved in months. I thanked her for her concern and told her not to worry. I ran to a bathroom and began to sob so deeply it made me retch. After I calmed enough, I made my way out and back to my room, not wanting to draw attention and cause a scene. I sat on my bed with my legs crossed and arms in my lap. I was staring at the wall, but my eyesight was blurry. One of the hardest adjustments was needing to wear glasses. As Kent, I wore shades occasionally. The bed began to squeak as I started to shake. I didn't know who I longed for, Kent's parents, Nina's dad, or Claire. None of this made any sense. After a few hours, I decided to visit the staff cafeteria and found a seat along one of the walls. I leaned my face against it, the cold concrete soothing. Some of my coworkers were speaking to one another as they moved in and out. It was late, so they only had sandwiches available. Mine was sitting on a plate untouched. A large black woman grabbed a sandwich and headed over to where I was sitting. She plopped down across from me and began to eat. Her name tag said Gladys, and she seemed to know me. She looked me over and nodded as she continued to eat. Once done, she grabbed my hand. "Hey, babe, you look better. Me and the other lady's been concerned." Tears streamed down my face as Gladys got up, pulled me to her, and hugged me tightly. I sobbed deeply as she took a napkin and wiped away my tears. Once I caught my breath, she grabbed my shoulders. "What you did for Marcus, I could never repay you for. If you need anything, just let me know," Gladys said. I grabbed her hand and squeezed it tightly. She nodded and cleared her tray as she left. I now had another mystery, but had to put it away for another time. It was comforting to know of a possibility that Nina could have been a good person. The days passed quickly, where we had multiple events happening concurrently, a needed reprieve which gave little time to think. A shower, change of clothes, and back out to the conference rooms. My boss started out obnoxious. When I first met, or actually re-met, Carl Brinkler, he seemed to avoid me like the plague. As I kept up with my hygiene, his demeanor changed. I once caught him sniffing near me and then looking me over. I had no reason to find him a threat or think he had an ulterior motive. My boss, being gay, had no interest in me sexually. "You must join me and Ted for dinner," Carl said, as he grabbed my arm and guided me down the hall. I'd have to take him up on the offer, but wanted to delay as long as possible. I still didn't know who I really was and why this happened. I began to ask myself why I chose to stay at the hotel. I guess, since the switch took place there, being close might provide some answers. I was sick of going over it again. I once laid down on the floor of the hallway where it happened, an unremarkable stretch of carpet with no discernible features. I was jolted awake one late night to a pounding on my door. Since I'd never had any visitors, this caused my heart to race. I tried to wait it out and see if they'd go away, but the pounding intensified. I rubbed at my eyes, glanced at the clock, and jumped out of bed towards the door. I opened it a crack and could see a guy in his 20s. He was wearing a button-down shirt and khakis. He combed a hand through his short red hair as he peered in. "Hey, Nina, it's Binky. Stop messing around, haven't got time for this." He pushed his way in and tossed a small black bag onto my bed. I shook my head as he laughed while leaning against the wall next to the closet. "Glad you found some time to clean yourself up. You almost look good enough to eat," he said, chuckling softly. I shook my head and adjusted my shirt. "It's $2.50, price has gone up. Sorry, I gotta pass the increase on to ya," he said, wiping at his nose. I stood near the bed, keeping my eyes on him. "I should charge you double since you cost me my best customer. Marcus is getting clean 'cause of you. What, you got nothing to say?" "Get the hell out of here," I said as I grabbed the bag, threw it at him, and pushed him out of my room. I slammed the door, locked it, and I fell to the floor as tears ran down my face. Binky Sinclair, his name and phone number written on another scrap of paper found in the side table drawer. Old Nina had tick marks on the back. Could be the times she'd bought from him. I tried to turn on the flip phone and found it dead. I dug around for the charger and waited for it to turn on. A few random calls and endless text messages from Binky, one from the night I had changed from Kent to Nina. Was that it? Did that cause a chain reaction? Up until then, Binky had been meeting with Nina every few days. It did explain why she hadn't any money. Even with her measly salary, she could have saved some, notwithstanding a drug addiction. And it also explained her condition when I became her. What would happen when we switched back? Would old Nina settle back into her old ways? I needed more answers and only knew one source to get them. Where should I go to meet up with Kent, and when would be the best time? Carl would no longer take no for an answer. He invited me to dinner at his home on a night we had no events taking place. I had to ask Gladys to come with me shopping. I needed a dress, purse, and coat. I didn't want to wear my work clothes or one of the things I found in the closet post-transformation. I picked up a bottle of wine suggested by Benny, one of the chefs at the hotel. The liquor store was within walking distance. After a quick ride by subway, I emerged onto Broadway. They lived in a building somewhere in Tribeca, a part of town I wasn't familiar with. I followed some signs and was finally standing in front of an apartment building which faced the water. A doorman greeted me and asked who I was visiting. After speaking with Carl, he waved me through. I entered the elevator and felt the weightlessness as it climbed. Moments later, I found myself upon a long, narrow hallway. Carl was standing at the end of it. "Hey, Nina, we're down here." He guided me into the apartment and through a narrow hallway. Once inside, I could see tall windows that reached towards a high ceiling. The view was of the river and what must have been New Jersey beyond. I handed him the bottle, he took my coat, and led me into the kitchen. "This is Ted," Carl said as he gestured for me to sit. A row of stools lined a counter that bordered the kitchen. Carl joined me as Ted opened the bottle, turned back to the stove, and was stirring something. "It's great to finally meet you," Ted said as he placed 3 glasses in front of us. I smiled as Carl poured the wine. Moments later, we were seated. I hadn't remembered eating anything that good in a long time. During the meal, I'd sometimes become confused with which utensils to use. I guess as Kent, I hadn't paid enough attention. I watched Carl and Ted and tried mimicking them as best I could. I got up to help clear the table until Ted threw me out of the kitchen. He thanked me and suggested I join Carl in the living room. I nodded as I turned around and found Carl sitting on a couch facing the windows. The sky had changed from a mixture of reds to dark blues. I could see some of the adjacent buildings, which contained a myriad of windows, tiny views into countless lives, all happening concurrently. "I'm so glad you joined us," Carl said while sipping from a glass. "Can I pour you some?" I shook my head, sat down across from him, and crossed my legs. I could hear Ted from the kitchen, humming softly. "The past few months, I've seen such changes in you, showing initiative, taking interest in our clients, and your appearance. Wow," Carl said, shaking the ice around in his glass. "I'd take it was you who I should thank for the raise?" He nodded as he stared down at his glass. "What made you do this? You seem like a different person." "Don't know. Guess I was just tired of how things were," I said, feeling guilty. Not sure how he'd take the truth. He'd probably think I was crazy. Ted came in and sat next to Carl. The conversation, to my relief, migrated to a series of benign topics: TV, movies, and ultimately music. It became late. I got up and both of them followed suit. I awkwardly kissed each on the cheek as I thanked them. Carl escorted me to the front door and handed me my coat. The train bounced around as it made its way back uptown. Before I knew it, I was back in my room with my new dress hanging in the closet. I got ready for bed and ended up staring at the ceiling. Although it was a pleasant evening, more importantly, I placated my boss. A few months passed and I tried to move on, but at night when alone, it all came rushing back. I felt as if my head was still in 2 different places. How could I give up my past life, friends, family, and job? No matter how things improved at the hotel, I couldn't get rid of that nagging feeling. So many memories from Kent's life, and Claire was the clearest of them, a closeness that was confusing. I immediately recognized her in the ER as I peered through the glass that separated me from the receptionist. I could see Claire standing at a desk beyond the doors leading into the examination stalls. I wanted to test the theory again, like what I did at the gym that Kent belonged to. This was going to be much harder, and I was constantly second-guessing myself. I checked in with reception and asked specifically for Dr. Parker. I reached for my front pocket, but then realized my wallet was in my purse. Adjusting the carrying one was taking longer than expected. I handed the woman my insurance card, and she gave me a form to fill out. After sitting for a half an hour, they called me. I almost missed it, still not used to identifying myself as Nina. A nurse guided me to a curtained bed and handed me a gown. "Please change. The doctor will be with you shortly. Luckily, it's quiet right now," she said while pulling the curtain around me. Claire was almost the same as I remembered her, but now wore her hair pulled back. It did make her look a bit older. She was speaking with another nurse who was standing beside her. "Hello, Miss Williams. Are you experiencing some abdominal pain?" Claire asked while taking notes. I nodded while looking down at my feet and noticed a few holes in my socks. I tried to obscure them by moving my feet around. "Okay, let's take a quick look," Claire said. I'd never had a gynecological exam, but that was extremely embarrassing and uncomfortable. She found no issues and decided to perform an ultrasound. They helped me lower my legs as a man pulled in some kind of machine. Claire thanked him as he plugged it into the wall and left. "No need to be frightened," she said as she grabbed my hand. I hadn't noticed I was shaking before then. She gently pulled up my gown and began to move a wand across my belly with a cord attached to it. "Everything looks good, including the cervix and both ovaries. We'll wait for the lab results to be sure, but can't see anything wrong. You look like a perfectly healthy woman, Claire said, as I began to sob. The nurse nodded and pulled the machine away as Claire wiped off my stomach. It was still slick from some of the gel she used during the test. I'll be back in a few minutes. Get changed and we'll talk, Claire said, disappearing from the curtain. I pulled the gown off and quickly got dressed. I made for the door and felt a firm grip around my right arm. Hey, I thought we were going to talk, Claire said while letting go. I stumbled and almost fell as she caught me. She grabbed my hand and brought me into the doctor's lounge. We sat at a round table across from one another. She got back up, poured coffee, and placed a cup in front of me. Do you want to tell me what's really bothering you? Claire said as I nodded and wrapped my hands around the cup. Someone entered, poured coffee, and then left. We sat in silence and I could hear the hum from the overhead lights. You clearly came here for a reason and asked for me by name. Do we know each other? Claire asked. As I opened my mouth, someone burst into the room as Claire's pager began to buzz. We've got multiple GSWs 5 minutes out, a nurse said as Claire jumped up and followed her out. The chaos gave me the perfect opportunity to escape. As ambulances rolled in, I slipped out. Once down in the subway, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my card, and swiped it at a turnstile. I barely remembered the ride back. That night, we had multiple parties at the hotel, which had both Carl and I pulled in all directions. Once everything was over, we sat at a table in the large ballroom. One of the other managers came in with a tray of leftovers, and some of the others joined us. Briefly, things felt great. Everyone was eating and laughing. Not long after, we all pitched in and finished clearing the room. Carl thanked everyone, patted me on the back, and made his way out. Hey, you, someone said, coming up from behind. Hey, what the? I trailed off after noticing a name tag. It was Marcus. I didn't remember him or had seen him around post-transformation. You look like you're doing better than good, Marcus said. I nodded and told him what happened with Binky. He then pulled me in close and hugged me. Like Mom says, don't let the fools take you down, he said and headed out. The following day, I was called to the office by radio, which made me nervous. As I made my way up, I was told I had a visitor. Could it be Kent? Why would he go to the office and have me paged? I came off the elevator and turned the corner expecting to see him. To my surprise, it was Claire who was speaking with Carl. So nice of you to bring back her purse, Carl said. Hello, Dr. Parker, I said while staring at the floor. Carl nodded, patted me on the shoulder, and left the office. I stood motionless for what seemed like an eternity. You left this at the hospital, Claire said, handing me my purse as I nodded. Thought you might have missed this. I really didn't think about it. I'm sorry, but I had to go through your things to find an ID or something that'd help find you. Your driver's license shows that you live in New Jersey. Been meaning to update that. Is there a more private place for us to talk? I nodded and led her to a vacant meeting room just down the hall. We both sat at a conference table and were facing each other. We were interrupted at the hospital. It seemed like you were about to tell me something. Dr. Parker, thanks for bringing me my purse. Sorry you made the trip. You could have called and I would have gotten it, I said, finding it hard to look at her as tears ran down my face. I just want you to know that I want to help, with whatever it is. Did someone hurt you? She asked as I shook my head. I told her that I was having a hard time with drugs and didn't want the hotel to find out, and I'd been clean for the last few months. I wanted to make sure I didn't suffer any lasting effects. Claire listened thoughtfully and moved a tissue box toward me as the tears continued to stream from my eyes. I pulled off my glasses and tried to wipe them away. Do you have any family? I nodded and then shook my head as I began to sob. She grabbed one of my hands as I continued to cry. Once I finally calmed, she let it go. My brother attends some kind of event or party here every year. I've never been inside before. Is there a bar or restaurant? I just finished a double shift and need food, Claire said as I nodded. I gathered up the pile of tissues I created and led her out and up to the bar on the street level. I introduced her to Benny and some of the others as we ate. The conversation meandered around but was deliberately kept light. Once we were done, she pulled out her wallet and I put my hand over it. I jumped up and hugged her and did everything I could to not cry again. Thank you, I said as she smiled. I brought her past the front desk and to the main entrance. hugged her, and she waved as she left. I went back to the restaurant and settled the bill. I stood at the bar, staring at the table we'd been sitting at, not sure if I felt good. What a stupid thing I did by leaving the purse at the hospital. I'm not cut out for this, I thought. I dragged myself back to my room, showered, and got into bed. I put my glasses on the nightstand and tried to sleep. I was up and down almost every hour. The day ran into one another, and I got lost in the schedule again. I didn't come up for air until 3 days had passed. I thought about Claire and then Kent. I got back to my room and pulled out the laptop, which I hadn't used for almost 2 weeks. A few messages from Kent to some friends, a few to a woman he'd met a few weeks ago. They were introduced by Claire and hit it off instantly. They were planning a weekend in Atlantic City. Some items about work. It seemed he was doing better at his job. And the last message was about Claire's wedding. It included an itinerary, a where and when for each event. I pulled my clipboard out and began copying it down. It was all to take place next month, which gave me some time to make arrangements. I logged off, straightened up my room, and headed out to do some laundry. I met up with Paula, and her face lit up as I walked in. After loading the washer, I grabbed some food and we caught up while we ate together. We talked about the hotel and how she wanted to retire in a few years. It was nice to not have to talk about myself. Not that I had much of a memory of the old Nina. I put in for some vacation time and printed out a map of where Claire's rehearsal dinner and wedding were going to take place. Unfortunately, it was being hosted out of town, and I'd have to travel and possibly stay overnight somewhere. I looked at my bank account and saw that the result after satisfying a hefty loan payment was quite small. The hotels on Long Island cost as much as ones in the city, if not more. Thankfully, I could take the train and walk to avoid taxis. The weeks dragged on as I waited for the first weekend of the following month to arrive. I thanked Carl for the time off and headed to Jamaica Station to meet up with a train heading east. The morning was cool as I waited for it. Thankfully, it was mostly empty as I found a seat near a window facing front. My bag sat on the seat next to me and I had my arm wrapped around its straps. As we began rolling, I could hear the conductor calling for tickets. I noticed a couple seated a few rows ahead and across the aisle. The woman had her head on the man's shoulder. A wave of nausea passed through me as the train jolted from one track to another. It bounced along for a long stretch and then thankfully smoothed out. I watched the landscape blur past as we moved from town to town, with an occasional stop. I could hear the clicking from the conductor as she punched more tickets. They announced that we'd be arriving at the final stop and we should gather our belongings. We pulled into Port Jefferson, and I was thankful they weren't hosting this further out east. It'd take me a half hour to walk from the station to the hotel. It was right on the water beyond a few bars, shops, and restaurants. Not that I could afford a room, but most were booked with no vacancies regardless. I entered the lobby and waited in line. Quite a few guests were ahead of me. The restaurant was bustling, and I could barely hear over the din. People talking, laughing, and the movement of dishes. It was finally my turn. "Hello, may I help you?" a man asked, who appeared to be close to my age. The name Tobias printed on a tag pinned to a gray sports coat. "You must be overbooked," I said, as his face flashed to a frown briefly. "Can I have your name, please?" "I don't have a reservation." "I'm sorry, you're correct. We don't have anything available. I can take your name and number, and if anything opens up, we'll call you," Tobias said. "I couldn't afford the rate anyway," I said. "Then what is it that I can do for you?" I pulled out my business card and slid it to him. "If I can store my bag here, I'd really appreciate it. You take my card and call when you want to stay at my hotel. I'll get you a room at the employee's rate." "Miss Williams, please give me a moment," Tobias said as he grabbed my card and picked up the phone. I watched as others around me become impatient as I stood at the front desk. Moments later, Tobias hung up the phone and called for his manager. "Miss Williams, this is Linda Flores, my manager." A slender woman wearing a red sports coat reached over and shook my hand. Her hair pulled tight and her face was kind. "You work at the Jameson?" Linda asked as I nodded. She pulled Tobias aside and whispered something to him and proceeded to help someone else. "Whatever you need, you let us know. Tobias said as he took my bag. I was again thankful, this time for professional courtesy. I had some time to kill and needed something to eat. In an effort to not wear out my welcome, I made my way out. I found a deli not far and was able to get something. Since my nerves were shot, I didn't have much of an appetite. I picked at something as I watched the town grow busier. I'd go back to the hotel, find a bathroom, and change. Tobias was still at the front desk, and he handed me my bag as I thanked him. I entered the powder room and found an empty stall, kicked off my sneakers, stripped off my sweatshirt and pants. I struggled with my shirt and managed to get it off without hitting my arms into the sides of the stall or flinging my glasses off my face and across the floor. I pulled my dress out of the bag and slowly climbed into it. I used a string to pull the zipper from the back, a trick I saw someone do on the internet. I pulled the string free and fed it into my bag along with my sneakers. I grabbed the flats and pulled them onto my feet. I didn't feel comfortable trying heels again. The last time I almost twisted an ankle. I exited the stall and approached the mirror and attempted to apply cosmetics. Hoping less was more, ended up with red lipstick but couldn't get the mascara right. Ended up just wiping it off, hoping that I didn't mess up. One last look and I was out. I waited for Tobias at the front desk and he then waved to me. "Oh my God, I didn't recognize you," he said, reaching for my bag as I smiled, hoping I didn't get any lipstick on my teeth. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see a group of men at the bar downing shots. I thanked Tobias, turned, and moved away from the front desk. The ringleader was hooting as he slammed a glass down. It was Kent, and he demanded another round as the others shouted words of encouragement at him. I began shaking as I walked over to the bar. It was almost 5 p.m., and they weren't due at the rehearsal dinner for another hour. I took a seat across from the bar after grabbing a half-empty glass from an uncleared table. It didn't take long for Kent to notice me. After downing a shot, he began coughing and was almost retching. Someone from the group began to pat him on his back. He pushed his way past everyone, tripped, almost fell into me, and stood motionless while staring right at me. "What the hell are you doing here?" Kent asked as he wiped his mouth with his hand. "That's all you have to say?" He grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the chair. The glass was flung off the table and crashed to the floor. This made the group take notice as he pulled me out and around to a service corridor. Kent held my arm so tightly it began to ache. It became almost unbearable, and thankfully he abruptly let go. I was thrown into a room with stacks of chairs and hit into one of them. This caused me to bounce off it and tumble to the floor. He stood towering over me. I had forgotten how tall I was when I was him, almost 6 feet and strong enough to bench quite a bit. No match for my current self. "This is how you treat me?" I asked while struggling to get up. "How the hell are you real? I thought you were part of some messed up dreams I'd been having for as long as I can remember." "Your locker combination at Cooper's gym is 334512. I began to spout an endless list of personal information. "You've been strung out on heroin, brought to you almost daily by that piece of shit Binky. Dad died a year ago. Mom died when you were 12. Living in your dad's car for a few months and moved into that crap hole after it was towed. That was after falsifying the hotel's inventory system," Kent said. It all came rushing back. I remembered everything about the old Nina, the time she broke her leg while roller skating at age 9. Hundreds of other memories I could now recite verbatim, some as if they happened yesterday, and others understandably vague. Kent almost fell while attempting to sit in one of the spare chairs. He had his hand against his forehead and his cell phone began to ring. He pulled it out and began to type out a message. "How'd this happen?" I asked. "I have no flipping idea, and why are you here? I needed to speak with you. I want you out of my goddamn head, feeling like I'm strung out on some kind of crap, going through withdrawal when I hadn't a damn thing." Kent stood up, walked over to me, grabbed me by my shoulders. Before I knew it, he had his hands around my neck and was choking me. I tried to push him off, but only managed to scratch the right side of his face. Things became blurry, and I could faintly hear him. "Get the hell out of my life," Kent said. I felt his hands pull away from my neck, but he didn't relax his grip. It was as if he was being pulled away from me, but was resisting with incredible effort. I awoke looking up at the ceiling and was still in the same room. A few people who I didn't recognize were standing around me. Then I heard a familiar voice and strained to sit up. It was Claire, who rushed over to me and began checking my vitals. "What the hell happened here?" Claire asked, turning to Kent. He was holding a handkerchief to his cheek as it began to turn red. "This crazy bitch attacked me, and I had to fight her off," Kent said. I sat up. My throat felt as if it was on fire, had one of my hands over it, and was having trouble breathing. That's when Claire got a better look at me and fell to the floor. Someone from the crowd ran to her and knelt down. Then a woman wearing a red dress entered and went over to Kent. She pulled away the handkerchief and checked his wound. I recognized her from the hospital. She was one of the nurses. "Nina? What are you doing here?" Claire said, staring directly at me. "You know her?" Kent asked. "She's a stalker and must have gotten into my apartment." I coughed and almost retched as I tried to clear my throat. "Tell her the truth," I said, barely able to produce a whisper. Claire got up and went over to Kent to check his wound. "She came to the hospital, and then I went to where she worked. I know her. What is going on between the two of you?" Claire asked. "All I know is that she showed up here and wanted to talk to me. I haven't seen her before. She's crazy," Kent said as Claire turned back to me. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing. You need to get out of here and stay the hell away from us." "You want me to call the police?" the woman in the red dress asked as Claire shook her head. I got up off the floor and approached Claire. "When you were almost 13, your uncle was about to attack you. Kent rushed into the bathroom and caught him," I said as I walked out. I got to the front desk and didn't recognize anyone. I identified myself and a young man provided me with my bag. I grabbed it and got out of the hotel as I saw the group emerge from the bar. I didn't look back as I crossed the street, the sidewalks congested with people. I was thankfully swallowed up by the crowd. I checked the train schedule and was in luck. If I hurried, I could catch one that was to leave at the bottom of the hour. My throat was killing me and my head ached. I pressed on and arrived just in time to purchase a ticket and find a seat on a lonely bench facing the parking lot. What did I think was going to happen? Kent would sweep me off my feet? Well, not exactly, but didn't think he'd try to kill me. I hated what this did to Claire. I was hoping she wouldn't have seen any of this. All I wanted to do was call Binky and have him waiting for me with my usual. Regardless how messy things turned out, I had my memories back and oddly still Kent's. I hated my mother and father for both dying. I hated Binky for getting me strung out on dope. I hated pulling Marcus into all of the horrible crap. He'd already been having problems with booze, and I then introduced him to Binky. It was all my fault. I didn't remember any of this up until then. The train pulled into the station and I got onto it. It cut through the darkness as it headed toward the city. The lights blinked intermittently as it bounced along the uneven patches of track. It was sparsely populated as we stopped at stations along the way. Just a few got on and off as the conductor punched tickets. I felt as if moments had passed and I was walking along Jamaica Avenue and would get onto the subway further up. I needed the fresh air since my breathing was labored. My head still hurt and throat stung. I never felt more alone until then. Before I knew it, 6 months had passed since my trip to Port Jefferson and was still clean. With help from Marcus, we were both able to move forward. We'd heard Binky had been arrested for selling to undercover police. I kept apologizing, but Marcus never accepted it. He didn't blame me. Carl got me another bump in pay, and I was able to rent a studio apartment not far from the hotel. I got a call from Tobias, who wanted to stay at the hotel, and asked if I wanted to join him on a tour of the city. He'd spent the last few years working nonstop and took my offer as a sign to take some time off. I arranged to be off while he was in town, and we spent a few days together. "Now it's your turn. Come out to me and we'll go out east. I want to show you so much," Tobias said, and being the perfect gentleman, then kissed me on the cheek. I hugged him before he boarded the train heading back east. The weather was cool and the late afternoon sun began to hide behind tall buildings to the west. I walked up 7th Avenue towards Times Square. After a quick subway ride, I was back in Queens and could see my building on the following block. I collected my mail and rode the elevator to my floor. As I exited the elevator, I saw Claire sitting on the floor next to my door. As I approached, she didn't turn to me. She was sobbing, and her knees were pulled up to her chest. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked. "They're dead," Claire said as her sobs grew deeper. "What happened?" I asked as she began screaming. I quickly opened my door, dragged her inside, and kicked the door closed. She was inconsolable. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around her as she fell asleep. I attempted to pull her onto the bed, but settled on wrapping her in a blanket. I noticed a wadded-up piece of paper on the floor next to her. I grabbed it, brought it to the table, and tried to flatten it out. It was an article about a boating accident where 2 men were killed. Kent Parker and George Stevens were ejected from a sailboat during an impending storm. The circumstances were still under investigation. Stevens had been recently married, and Parker was his brother-in-law. I folded the paper and turned to Claire. How long had she been waiting for me? It was hard for me to believe Kent was gone. No one would blame me if I was indifferent, but that wasn't the case. I'd felt the loss more than most would. A piece felt as if it was cut from me, and now I lay bleeding. But I didn't feel broken or lost. When I was rejected by him, it evolved into a relief. Not to say I wasn't hurt, but it allowed me to move past quite a lot. Claire stirred as I filled a kettle to boil water. She wiped her hands over her face, got up off the floor. She dropped into one of the chairs near a small table. I filled 2 mugs and brought them to the table and offered her tea. She took a bag and began dipping it into the cup over and over again. "I didn't think you'd let me in since what Kent did to you, what we did to you," Claire said while staring down at the table. I reached for her hand and she pulled it away, almost knocking over her cup. "What happened between you and Kent?" Claire asked. "It doesn't matter," I said. "Yes, it does. Please." I sipped from my cup and told her what I perceived to have happened. She didn't interrupt me once. "After I left the last time I saw you, things got a lot better. No desire to cry until now. I'm so sorry," I said. The loss now filled my soul as I stared into Claire's eyes. I had memories of her as a girl, joyful and always full of compassion. This time I went over to her and hugged her as she cried softly. She took a deep breath and I sat back down as she rubbed her eyes. "We never told anyone about what happened to me. Kent saved me and promised not to say anything to our parents. My uncle moved away after that. We never saw him again. He wasn't related, a work friend of your dad's," I said as she nodded. "This is crazy. It's all hard to believe," Claire said. I nodded as I got up and stood staring out the windows. I knew Kent as well as I knew myself. Could I blame him for how he treated me? Yes, but to tell Claire, it would devastate her. The part of me that was Kent gave me an overwhelming desire to protect her. I loved her with all my heart. I began to feel the same way as when this first started. My head was in 2 places, but now, thankfully, I had some new strength and possibly some personal worth, not from Kent or the old me, but a combination. Claire had more questions, and surprisingly, I did have all the answers. It both confused and comforted her. I went over to the stove and heated soup. She ate slowly while we continued to talk. I was thankful she had stopped crying. Thank you for taking the time to listen. If you or anyone you know is having substance abuse issues, call 1-800-662-4357 or text your zip code to HELP4U 435748. Domestic and gender-based violence support, call 1-800-621-HOPE. You are not alone. Please comment below. We look forward to hearing from you. If you enjoyed this program, hit the like button and subscribe so you're informed as to when new stories are available.